The first time Eleanor Hartwell stepped off the stagecoach in Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory, in the spring of 1878, she carried nothing but a leather satchel filled with surveying equipment, 3 pencils sharpened to perfect points, and a determination that could have carved through the Sangre de Cristo Mountains themselves. She had not come west to find a husband, despite what her mother had wept about back in Boston. She had come because the territorial surveys were wrong, incomplete, riddled with errors that cost settlers their claims and left entire valleys unmapped. Eleanor had spent 2 years studying cartography under Professor Langdon at the university, sneaking into lectures meant only for men, copying notes by candlelight until her eyes burned. She had learned to calculate elevation by barometric pressure, to measure distance by the stars, to read the land like others read novels. And now, at 23 years old, she intended to map the New Mexico Territory better than any government surveyor ever had. The plaza bustled with activity as she stood there, dust settling on her dark green traveling dress. Vendors called out in Spanish and English, offering pottery and woven blankets. A group of vaqueros laughed near the well, their spurs jingling. The air smelled of chili peppers roasting and horses, and something wild she could not yet name. Eleanor asked 3 different people for directions to the surveyor's office before she found it, a small adobe building with a crooked sign. Inside, a balding man with spectacles looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from curiosity to dismissal in the span of a heartbeat. "If you are looking for your husband, miss, I have not seen any new surveyors come through today," he said, already returning his attention to his papers. "I am not looking for anyone," Eleanor replied, setting her satchel on his desk with enough force to rattle his inkwell. "I am here to register as an independent surveyor. I have my credentials from Boston and samples of my work." The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Garrison, actually laughed. It was not a kind sound. "Miss, I do not know what they told you back east, but surveying is not women's work. It requires weeks in the wilderness, sleeping on the ground, dealing with hostile Indians and outlaws. You would not last 2 days." Eleanor had expected this. She opened her satchel and spread out 3 maps she had made of the area around Boston, each one detailed down to individual property markers, elevation changes, water sources. "These are more accurate than the official territorial surveys," she said calmly. "Check them if you doubt me, Mr. Garrison barely glanced at them. "I am sure they are very pretty, miss, but this is the frontier, not a drawing room. Go find yourself a husband and leave the surveying to men who know what they are doing." She gathered her maps with shaking hands, anger burning hot in her chest. She would not cry. She had not come 1,500 miles to cry in front of a small-minded bureaucrat. Outside, she stood in the plaza again, this time fighting the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. She had enough money for perhaps 2 months of room and board. After that, if she could not find work, she would have to return to Boston in defeat, to become exactly what her mother wanted: a wife to some merchant, spending her days planning dinner parties and pretending she had never dreamed of anything more. "You look like someone just stole your horse." Eleanor turned to find a man leaning against the adobe wall, watching her with eyes the color of aged whiskey. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the typical gear of a working cowboy: worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a hat that had seen better days. A gun belt sat low on his hips, the holster tied down in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. "I do not own a horse," Eleanor said stiffly, not in the mood for conversation with a strange man. "That is your first problem right there." He pushed off the wall and walked closer, moving with an easy grace. "Second problem is you just tried to convince Garrison to take you seriously. He would not recognize quality cartography if it bit him on his considerable backside." Eleanor blinked. "You were listening to my conversation." Window was open. "Hard not to hear." He held out his hand. "Caleb Morrison." I run cattle between here and the Pecos River when I am not scouting for wagon trains or tracking down strays. She hesitated, then shook his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, warm. Eleanor Hartwell. You really make maps, Miss Hartwell? Better than the surveyors do, yes. The words came out defensive. Caleb's mouth quirked into a half-smile. I believe you. I have been using the territorial surveys for 3 years now, and I have ridden off cliffs that were not supposed to be there, into rivers that were marked 5 miles south of where they actually run, and through Indian territory that was supposed to be empty grassland. Lost 2 good horses and nearly my life because someone could not be bothered to map things right. Eleanor felt something kindle in her chest. Hope, perhaps. The surveys are incomplete. They send men out for a few weeks, they make rough sketches, and they call it done. Real cartography requires time, precision, multiple instruments to verify measurements. Show me your maps, Caleb said. She did, right there in the plaza, spreading them across the edge of the well. Caleb studied them with an intensity that surprised her, his fingers tracing routes, his eyes narrowing as he calculated distances. This is remarkable, he said finally. You marked every water source, elevation changes, even the type of terrain. A man could navigate by these in the dark. That is the intention. Caleb looked up at her, and she saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. I need maps, Miss Hartwell. Real ones. I am planning a cattle drive to Dodge City in 8 weeks, and the route through the territory is going to make or break me. The usual trails are overgrazed, water sources drying up. I need to find a new path, but I cannot do that blind. He paused. I will pay you to map the route. $50 for complete surveys from here to the Kansas border. $50. It was less than a male surveyor would command, but it was a fortune to Eleanor right now. More than that, it was validation. Someone was willing to pay for her work. I would need to travel the route myself, she said. Take measurements, verify water sources, mark hazards. It could take 4 weeks, possibly more. I figured as much. I will take you. Someone needs to keep you from getting lost or scalped or falling into a canyon. When she started to protest, he held up a hand. This is not negotiable, Miss Hartwell. You do not know the territory, you do not speak Spanish or any of the Indian languages, and you clearly do not own a horse. You need a guide, and I need maps. We help each other. Eleanor wanted to argue, to insist she could manage alone, but she was not foolish enough to believe it. I pay for my own supplies, she said instead. Fair enough. Caleb rolled up her Boston maps and handed them back. We leave in 3 days. That gives you time to get proper traveling clothes and gear. Meet me at the livery stable on the north end of town, dawn on Monday. He walked away before she could respond, his spurs chiming softly against the packed earth. Eleanor watched him go, feeling as if she had just stepped off a cliff without checking the distance to the bottom. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Eleanor found a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had come west with her minor husband and stayed after he died of fever. She asked no questions about Eleanor's plans, simply rented her a small room and pointed her toward a seamstress who could make proper riding clothes. The seamstress, a Mexican woman named Rosa, was shocked at first by the request for split skirts and sturdy shirts, but warmed to the project when Eleanor paid in advance. You are very brave, Rosa said as she measured Eleanor's waist, or very foolish. My grandmother would say there is not much difference. Eleanor also bought a bedroll, a canteen, a wide-brimmed hat to protect her face from the sun, and sturdy boots. She spent her evenings reorganizing her surveying equipment, checking her compass, her sextant, her measuring chains. Everything had to be perfect. On Sunday night, she barely slept. She kept thinking about Caleb Morrison, wondering if she was making a terrible mistake trusting a strange man to guide her into the wilderness. But what choice did she have? She could return to Boston and spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Or she could take this chance and prove that her maps were worth something. Dawn came cold and clear. Eleanor dressed in her new traveling clothes. feeling strange in the split skirt that allowed her to sit a horse properly, the shirt that buttoned up to her collar, the vest Rosa had made from soft leather. She braided her dark blonde hair tightly and pinned it up under her hat, then shouldered her pack and walked to the livery stable. Caleb was already there, saddling 2 horses. He looked up as she approached and nodded approval. "Good. You look like you are ready to work, not attend a garden party." "I have never attended a garden party in my life," Eleanor said. "Then you have not missed anything." He gestured to a roan mare. "This is Sage. She is steady, does not spook easy, and she will not throw you unless you do something truly stupid. You know how to ride." "I took lessons as a girl." Eleanor approached the mare, letting the horse smell her hand before stroking her neck. Sage's dark eyes were calm, intelligent. "Lessons." Caleb shook his head. "Well, you are about to get an education. We have a long day ahead of us." "The plan is to head southeast toward the Picos, map the route as we go. We will camp rough most nights, stay at ranches when we can. You keep up, do your surveying, and I will make sure nothing eats you. Sound fair?" "Perfectly fair." Caleb helped her secure her pack behind the saddle, his hands quick and efficient. Then he swung up onto his own horse, a tall buckskin gelding that looked like it could run forever. "Let's see if you can keep up, Miss Hartwell." They rode out of Santa Fe as the sun climbed above the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Eleanor had ridden before, but never like this, never for hours at a stretch across open country. Her thighs began to ache within the first hour, her back protesting the unfamiliar posture. But she did not complain. She focused on the land around her, on the way it rose and fell, the distant mesas, the scrub brush and piñon pines. After 2 hours, Caleb called a halt near a small stream. "Water the horses. We will rest 10 minutes, then push on." Eleanor dismounted, her legs trembling. She tried to hide it, but Caleb noticed everything. "You are doing fine," he said, surprising her with the kindness in his voice. "Most people from back east would be crying by now." "The day is still young," Eleanor said dryly, and he laughed. While the horses drank, Eleanor pulled out her notebook and began sketching the route they had taken, noting landmarks, calculating their approximate speed and distance. Caleb watched her work, saying nothing, but she felt his attention like a physical thing. "You really love this," he said finally. "Yes." Eleanor did not look up from her notes. "My father was a mathematician. He taught me that the world makes sense if you measure it correctly, if you pay attention to the details. Mapping is like solving a puzzle, except the puzzle is real and the solution can save lives. Your father must be proud. He died when I was 16. Eleanor's pencil stilled for a moment. "Cholera. My mother wanted me to give up his books, his instruments, everything that reminded her of him. But I could not. It was like giving up a part of myself." "I am sorry." Caleb's voice was quiet. "My parents died too, Comanche raid when I was 12. I was out checking the cattle, came back to find the house burning." Eleanor looked up, meeting his eyes. She saw old pain there, buried deep but never forgotten. "How did you survive?" "A neighbor took me in, taught me the cattle business. I have been working ever since." He turned away, adjusting his saddle. "We should keep moving. We want to make the old Sanchez ranch by nightfall." They rode on, and Eleanor lost herself in the rhythm of it, the steady clop of hooves, the creak of leather, the vast blue sky overhead. Every hour she called a halt to take measurements, to sketch the terrain, to note water sources and potential hazards. Caleb waited patiently each time, sometimes offering information about the land, other times simply watching her work. By the time the sun began its descent, Eleanor's entire body ached. Her hands were blistered from the rains, her back felt like it might break, and her face burned despite the hat. But she had filled 5 pages of her notebook with observations, had calculated their position by the stars she had glimpsed at midday with her sextant, and had a clear sense of the route they had traveled. The Sanchez Ranch appeared as the last light faded, a low adobe building with a corral and a few outbuildings. An old man came out to greet them, his face creasing into a smile when he saw Caleb. "Morrison, I wondered when you would come through again." "Good to see you, Don Sanchez." I brought a friend. This is Miss Eleanor Hartwell. She is mapping the territory for me." Don Sanchez looked at Eleanor with curiosity but no judgment. "A cartographer? How wonderful! My father, he came from Spain. He had such maps of the old country. Beautiful things like art. Please come inside." "My wife, she has made stew, and there is fresh bread." The inside of the ranch house was cool and welcoming, the walls hung with religious icons and family photographs. Doña Sanchez, a plump woman with kind eyes, fussed over Eleanor immediately, insisting she wash and rest before eating. Over dinner, Eleanor listened as Caleb and Don Sanchez talked about cattle prices, the drought that had struck the previous summer, the increasing railroad expansion. She was content to observe, to eat the rich beef stew and warm bread, to let the conversation wash over her. But then Doña Sanchez turned to her. "So you make maps, yes. This is very unusual work for a woman." "Yes, ma'am, I suppose it is." "Why do you do this? Surely there are easier ways to live." Eleanor set down her spoon, considering her answer. "Because I am good at it." "Because the maps that exist are wrong, and wrong maps get people killed. And because I cannot imagine spending my life doing something that does not matter." Doña Sanchez smiled. "This, I understand. When I was young, everyone said I should marry a rich man from the city. Instead, I married this old goat and came to this ranch in the middle of nowhere. My mother, she did not speak to me for a year, but I was happy. Sometimes we must follow our own path, even when others do not understand." That night, Eleanor slept on a cot in a small guest room, her body so exhausted that she barely remembered lying down. She dreamed of lines and angles, of mountains waiting to be measured, of a map that stretched out before her like an unwritten future. They set out again at dawn, this time heading more directly southeast. The landscape changed gradually, the mountains giving way to rolling hills, then to flatter grasslands. Eleanor documented everything, stopping every few miles to take readings with her sextant, to measure elevations with her barometer, to sketch the distinctive features of the land. Caleb proved to be an excellent guide. He knew where to find water, even when there was no obvious source. He could read the land for signs of danger, whether from weather or wildlife or other humans. And he had an endless patience for Eleanor's need to stop and measure and calculate. On the third day out from Santa Fe, they encountered a group of Jicarilla Apache traveling north. Eleanor's hand went instinctively to the rifle in her saddle holster, but Caleb shook his head slightly. "Easy, I know their leader, just let me talk." The Apache rode up slowly, 6 warriors on painted ponies. Their leader, a man of perhaps 40 with a scar across his cheek, raised his hand in greeting. Caleb responded in kind, then spoke in a mixture of Spanish and what Eleanor assumed was Apache. The conversation lasted several minutes, with the leader occasionally glancing at Eleanor with curiosity. Finally, Caleb reached into his pack and pulled out a bag of tobacco, which he handed over. The Apache leader accepted it with a nod, said something else, and then the group rode on. "What did he say?" Eleanor asked when they were alone again. "He wanted to know why I was traveling with a white woman who looked like she was measuring the land. I told him you were making maps, that you were under my protection. He said any woman brave enough to ride into Apache territory deserves to finish her work. The tobacco was a courtesy, payment for safe passage through this area. Will they truly leave us alone? The Jicarilla will. Other tribes might not be so accommodating. That is why you stay close to me and you do what I say without argument. Understood, understood." That night they camped in the open, no ranch or settlement within reach. Caleb built a small fire and cooked bacon and beans in a cast iron skillet. Eleanor sat on her bedroll, updating her maps by firelight, adding the details she had observed throughout the day. "You never stop working," Caleb observed, handing her a tin plate of food. "I could say the same about you. You have been in the saddle since dawn. That is different. Riding is not work, it is living." Eleanor smiled despite her exhaustion. "Mapping is not work for me either. It is solving a mystery. Every day I learn something new about this land, see how it fits together. It is like reading a book in a language only I can understand. Caleb sat down across from her, the fire casting shadows across his face. You are not like anyone I have ever met, Eleanor Hartwell. It was the first time he had used her given name. Something warm unfurled in Eleanor's chest, something she did not want to examine too closely. Is that a compliment or an observation? Both. He took a bite of beans, chewed thoughtfully. Most people come west running from something. But you came running toward something. That takes courage, or foolishness. My mother would say foolishness. Your mother is not here. Caleb's eyes met hers across the fire. You are, and you are doing something remarkable. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Eleanor felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with the fire. She ducked her head, pretending to focus on her food. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the distant yip of coyotes, the wind moving through the grass. After dinner, Eleanor excused herself to walk a short distance from camp for privacy. When she returned, Caleb had rolled out her bedroll near the fire but not too close, and had placed his own between her and the darkness beyond. You take first watch, she asked. I take all watches. You need sleep. That is not fair. I can help. Can you shoot? Eleanor hesitated. I have fired a rifle. That is not the same as shooting. Until I know you can hit what you aim at, I will handle night watch. Now get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Eleanor wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She crawled into her bedroll, still wearing most of her clothes against the cold, and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Above her, the stars spread across the sky in a glittering carpet, more stars than she had ever seen in Boston. She located the North Star, Cassiopeia, Orion. The constellations were old friends, reliable guideposts. Caleb, she said into the darkness. Yes. Thank you for taking me seriously, for giving me this chance, a long pause. Then, thank you for making maps I can trust my life to. Now sleep, Eleanor. She closed her eyes, smiling. The days blurred together into a pattern: ride, measure, map, camp, sleep. Eleanor's body grew stronger, the aches fading as muscles adapted. Her face bronzed despite her hat, her hands growing as calloused as Caleb's. She learned to read the land the way he did, to spot water from the type of vegetation, to judge distances by the clarity of the air, and she learned about Caleb. He was 28, had been working cattle since he was a boy. He read when he could get books, had taught himself Spanish and some Apache from necessity. He loved this land with a fierce devotion that he rarely put into words, but showed in every action, in the way he handled his horse, in his respect for the people who had lived here long before white settlers arrived. They talked for hours as they rode, about everything and nothing. Eleanor told him about Boston, about the university lectures she had sneaked into, about Professor Langdon, who had encouraged her cartography despite the scandal it caused. Caleb told her about the cattle drives he had been on, about trail towns and stampedes, and the year he nearly died of a fever in Dodge City. She found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way he moved, graceful and certain. The way he smiled when something amused him, just a quirk of his mouth. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, which was more often than she had expected. And sometimes she caught him watching her too, with an expression she could not quite read. 2 weeks into their journey, they reached the Pecos River. It was not the mighty waterway the territorial surveys claimed, but a muddy, sluggish stream running between red banks. Eleanor spent an entire afternoon measuring its width, depth, and flow, correcting the gross errors on the official maps. The surveys have this marked as being navigable, she said, disgusted. A canoe would run aground every 10 feet. I told you they were useless. Caleb was checking his horse's hooves, making sure no stones had lodged in the frogs. How much longer until you have enough data for the route? Eleanor consulted her notes. Another week, perhaps 10 days. I need to map the northern approach to the Kansas border, verify the water sources along that stretch. Once I have that, I can create a complete route map for your cattle drive. Good, that gives us plenty of time. He straightened, studying the sky. Weather is holding, which is lucky. This time of year we could see thunderstorms roll in out of nowhere. As if to spite him, the sky began to darken that evening, clouds building to the west like mountains of ash. By the time they made camp, thunder rumbled in the distance and the wind had picked up, bringing the smell of rain. "We need better shelter than open ground," Caleb said, scanning the landscape. "There is an old line shack about 2 miles north. If we push hard, we can make it before the storm hits." They rode fast, the horses sensing the approaching weather and needing little urging. The first drops of rain fell as they spotted the shack, a leaning structure of weathered wood that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind. But it had a roof and 4 walls, and that was enough. They got the horses into a small lean-to attached to the shack, unsaddled them, and hauled their gear inside just as the sky opened up. Rain hammered the roof like drumbeats, and lightning flashed so bright it turned the world white. Thunder followed immediately, shaking the walls. Inside the shack, Eleanor stood dripping on the dirt floor, her hat ruined, her clothes soaked through. Caleb was equally drenched, his hair plastered to his head. For a moment they just looked at each other, and then Eleanor started to laugh. She could not help it. They looked ridiculous, like drowned cats. Caleb grinned, and then he was laughing too, the sound of it mixing with the storm outside. "So much for your weather holding," Eleanor said when she could catch her breath. "I have been wrong before." He shrugged out of his wet vest and shirt, wringing them out. Eleanor tried not to stare at his bare chest, at the muscles defined by years of hard work, at the scars that marked his skin like a map of violence survived. She turned away quickly, busying herself with her pack. "I should change. These clothes are soaked. I will step outside. In this storm, do not be ridiculous, just turn around." He did, facing the wall while Eleanor struggled out of her wet clothes and into the single dry shirt and blanket she had kept wrapped in oilcloth. The shirt hung to her knees, decent enough. She wrung out her hair as best she could and wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "All right. I am decent." Caleb turned back, his eyes skimming over her before focusing on building a small fire in the stone fireplace. He had kept dry kindling in his pack, wrapped carefully, and soon had flames crackling. The warmth felt like salvation. They hung their wet clothes on nails protruding from the walls and settled near the fire. The storm showed no signs of stopping, the rain relentless against the roof. The shack was small enough that sitting by the fire meant sitting close together, their shoulders almost touching. "Thank you," Eleanor said after a long silence, "for getting us to shelter in time. Part of the job." But Caleb's voice was soft, and when Eleanor glanced at him, she found him already looking at her. Something had shifted between them over the past 2 weeks, something neither of them had acknowledged aloud. But here, in the small shelter with the storm raging outside, with her guard down and exhaustion making her honest, Eleanor could not pretend anymore. "Caleb," she said, and then did not know how to continue. "Eleanor." He lifted his hand, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of wet hair back from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and rough and tender all at once. She leaned into his touch without thinking, her eyes closing. When she opened them, he was closer, so close she could count the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I should not," he said, but he did not move away. "Why not?" "Because you are a client. Because you are a lady from Boston and I am a cowboy who barely owns his horse and saddle. Because when this job is done, you will go back east where you belong and I will still be here, chasing cattle across the same empty miles." Eleanor's heart twisted. "What if I do not want to go back east?" "Do not say that." Caleb's voice was rough. "Do not say that unless you mean it." "I mean it." Eleanor reached up, covering his hand with hers where it still cupped her cheek. "I mean it, Caleb. I did not come west to find a husband, but I think I found something better. I found work that matters. I found land that challenges me. I found a man who sees me as I actually am, not as what I should be." Eleanor. Her name was a prayer and a curse on his lips, and then he was kissing her, his mouth capturing hers with a hunger that stole her breath. Eleanor kissed him back, her hands fisting in his damp hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, grew urgent. Caleb's arms went around her, crushing her against him, and Eleanor could feel the rapid beat of his heart against her own chest. She had been kissed before, chased kisses from suitable young men at proper dances. Those kisses had felt like nothing, dust compared to this wildfire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "This is a mistake. Then I want to make it 1,000 more times," he laughed, a shaky sound. "You are going to destroy me, Eleanor Hartwell. Only if you are very lucky." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small shack, wrapped in each other's arms, Eleanor felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. They did not do more than kiss that night. Caleb was too much of a gentleman, and Eleanor was too aware of the line she was walking. But they held each other as they slept, his chest against her back, his arm around her waist, and that felt like intimacy enough. Morning came with clear skies and the world washed clean. Eleanor woke to find Caleb already up, boiling coffee over a rebuilt fire. He smiled at her, a real smile that reached his eyes, and handed her a tin cup. "Sleep well, better than I have in years." Eleanor sipped the bitter coffee, welcoming the warmth. "Do we need to talk about last night? Probably, but not right now." Caleb sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched. "Right now, let us just enjoy the fact that we are both alive, dry, and the horses did not run off in the storm." A low bar for success. Out here, you take what you can get. They spent the morning letting their gear dry, checking the horses, and eating a breakfast of hardtack and jerky. Eleanor worked on her maps, incorporating the previous day's observations. Caleb watched her work, his expression thoughtful. "What are you going to do with these maps once they are done?" he asked. "Give you copies for your cattle drive first. After that, I am not certain. Try to get them published, perhaps. Make more maps of other areas. Build a reputation so that people will hire me." She looked up at him. "Why?" "Because I have been thinking. What if instead of just mapping my route, you mapped the whole territory, all the trails, all the water sources, all the safe passages? You could sell copies to settlers, to wagon trains, to the army. People would pay good money for accurate maps." Eleanor's heart began to race. "That would take years. I would need supplies, equipment, constant travel. I know, and you would need a guide. Someone who knows the territory, who can keep you safe, who can translate when needed." Caleb met her eyes. "Someone like me." "Are you offering to be my permanent guide, Caleb Morrison?" "I am offering to be your partner. You make the maps, I provide the expertise and protection. We split the profits, we build something together." He paused. "If you are interested." Eleanor set down her pencil carefully. "I am interested in everything you just said, but I need to know this is not just because of last night. Because if we are going to be partners, it has to be built on more than attraction. It is built on respect." Caleb's voice was steady, certain. "You are the best cartographer I have ever seen. Your work is meticulous, accurate, valuable. I knew that before I kissed you. Last night just made me realize I do not want to watch you walk away when this job is done. I want to see what we can build together, both as partners and as something more." "Something more," Eleanor repeated softly. "You mean courting, if you will have me." "I know I am not what your mother would choose for you. I do not have money or prospects beyond the next cattle drive. But I am honest, I work hard, and I will never ask you to be anything other than who you are." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Caleb Morrison, you are exactly what I would choose for myself. Yes. Yes to the partnership, yes to courting, yes to building something together." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet, a promise sealed. They spent another week mapping the northern route, working their way toward the Kansas border. The days were long and hot, the nights cool and star-filled. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together with an efficiency born of growing understanding. Caleb began to anticipate what Eleanor needed before she asked, holding the measuring chains, marking waypoints, offering observations about seasonal changes that would affect travel. And every night, After the work was done and dinner eaten, they sat together by the fire and talked about the future. Eleanor sketched out plans for a comprehensive territorial survey, calculating costs and timelines. Caleb contributed ideas about which routes would be most valuable to map first, which territories were opening to settlers and would need reliable navigation. It was during one of these conversations that Eleanor admitted something she had been thinking about for days. I would need to establish a base, somewhere central to work from. Santa Fe makes the most sense, but I cannot afford to rent space for an office and living quarters on my own. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. What if we established a household together? Eleanor's heart skipped. Caleb, that would require marriage. I will not live with you otherwise. Whatever people say about women from the East being fast, I have my standards. Then marry me. The words came out steady, sure. Not right now, not rushed. But when we get back to Santa Fe, once you have had time to think about it without me hovering over you in the middle of the wilderness. Marry me, Eleanor. Be my wife and my partner. Build this business with me. Build a life with me. Eleanor could barely breathe. You are serious. I have never been more serious about anything. Caleb took her hands in his. I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I also know that I have never met anyone like you, and I never will again. You are brilliant and brave and stubborn as hell, and I want to spend the rest of my life watching you map the world. Say yes, he added when she remained silent. Please say yes. Yes. The word burst out of Eleanor like a shout of joy. Yes, I will marry you, yes to everything. Caleb pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply, and Eleanor kissed him back with all the love and hope and excitement surging through her veins. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. Your mother is going to hate me, Caleb said, probably. But she is 1,500 miles away, and I have stopped caring what she thinks. Eleanor laughed. Besides, once I start sending her money from our mapping business, she will find a way to justify her disapproval to all her friends while still enjoying the benefits. They finished the survey 3 days later, Eleanor's notebooks filled with precise measurements, detailed sketches, and comprehensive notes. She spent an entire day at their final camp creating the master route map, transferring all her data onto a large sheet of high-quality paper she had saved for this purpose. The finished map showed every water source, every dangerous passage, every campsite and landmark along the route from Santa Fe to the Kansas border. Caleb studied it with something like awe. This is a work of art. It is functional art, Eleanor corrected, but she was pleased. A rancher with this map could move cattle efficiently, avoiding the worst terrain, knowing exactly where to find water even in drought. It could save weeks of travel time. It could save lives. Caleb carefully rolled the map and secured it in a leather tube. Let us get this back to Santa Fe. I have a cattle drive to plan and a woman to marry. The journey back took 4 days of hard riding. They arrived in Santa Fe on a Saturday evening, dusty and tired but triumphant. Mrs. Chen greeted Eleanor with surprise and pleasure, insisting she take a hot bath and a proper meal. Eleanor agreed gratefully, but not before making Caleb promise to return in the morning. I am not going anywhere, he assured her. I need to start organizing the drive anyway, but tomorrow we talk about wedding plans and business logistics, in that order. Eleanor slept in a real bed that night for the first time in weeks, but she found herself missing the hard ground, the open sky, and most of all, the warmth of Caleb beside her. She had changed out here in the wilderness, become someone stronger and surer than the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 6 weeks ago. And she knew there was no going back, even if she wanted to. In the morning, Caleb arrived with an older woman Eleanor had not met before, a rancher named Martha Gaines who owned property north of Santa Fe. Martha was in her 50s, weathered and practical, with sharp eyes that assessed Eleanor in a single glance. So you are the cartographer Caleb has been going on about, Martha said. He says you can map better than the government surveyors. I can, Eleanor said simply. Martha smiled. Confidence, I like that. Let me see your work. Eleanor spread out the route map on Mrs. Chen's dining table. Martha studied it for a long time, asking pointed questions about elevations, water sources, seasonal variations. Eleanor answered each query with precise data, showing her notes and calculations. Finally, Martha straightened. Caleb was right. This is exceptional work. I want to hire you to map my ranch and the surrounding territory. I'm planning to expand my herd, and I need to know exactly what land I have, where the boundaries are, where the best grazing lies. Can you do that? Eleanor's pulse raced. Yes, absolutely. My rate is $50 for a comprehensive survey. Make it $75, and include seasonal notations about water and grass. I will also spread word among the other ranchers. If your work is as good as this sample, you will have more business than you can handle. Done. Eleanor shook Martha's hand, sealing the agreement. After Martha left, Caleb swept Eleanor into his arms and spun her around. You did it. You have a real client, a recommendation from one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. We did it, Eleanor corrected. This is our business, remember? Partners, partners, Caleb agreed. Then his expression grew serious. About that. Before we make this official, before we get married, I need to be honest with you about my finances. I have about $200 saved, and I will make decent money from this cattle drive if it goes well. But I am not rich, Eleanor. I may never be rich. If you marry me, we are going to have to work hard for everything we build. Caleb, I did not fall in love with you for money. I fell in love with you because you are kind and brave and because you see me as an equal. We will work hard and we will build something remarkable, and that is enough. That is more than enough. I love you, Caleb said, the words rough with emotion. I should have said it before, but I love you, Eleanor Hartwell. I think I have loved you since you spread your maps on the well in the plaza and looked at me like you were daring me to doubt your skill. Eleanor felt tears slide down her cheeks. I love you too, so much it frightens me sometimes. I never expected to find this when I came west. Neither did I. Caleb kissed her softly. Let us get married soon. I do not want to wait. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the mission church. Don and Doña Sanchez came, along with Martha Gaines, Mrs. Chen, Rosa the seamstress, and a handful of other people Eleanor and Caleb had befriended. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding Eleanor's mother had always envisioned, no white lace dress or orchestra or hundreds of guests. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress Rosa had made with wildflowers in her hair. Caleb wore clean denim pants, a pressed white shirt, and a black vest, his hair neatly trimmed. The priest spoke the ceremony in Spanish and English, and when he asked if they promised to love and honor each other, both answered clearly. I do. Caleb kissed his bride as the small gathering applauded, and Eleanor thought she had never been happier in her entire life. They spent their wedding night in a small house Caleb had rented on the outskirts of Santa Fe, a 2-room adobe structure with whitewashed walls and a view of the mountains. It was not much, but it was theirs. Eleanor had set up her drafting table in the main room, her surveying equipment organized neatly on shelves Caleb had built. His saddle and gear occupied one corner, maps tacked to the walls showing the routes he had ridden over the years. That night, for the first time, they came together fully without reservation. Caleb was gentle and patient, mindful of Eleanor's inexperience. But there was passion, too, a fire that burned between them, fueled by weeks of wanting and waiting. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Eleanor's head on Caleb's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. No regrets, Caleb asked, his fingers trailing through her loose hair. Not a single one. Eleanor propped herself up to look at him. You are stuck with me now, Cowboy. For better or worse. Mostly better, I suspect. He pulled her back down, kissing the top of her head. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we have work to do, and work they did. Over the next 2 months, Eleanor threw herself into mapping Martha Gaines' ranch, documenting every acre with meticulous precision. Caleb was often gone, organizing his cattle drive, but when he was home, he helped with the surveying, learning the techniques and calculations so he could assist more efficiently. The cattle drive left in early summer, 100 head bound for Dodge City. Caleb was gone for 6 weeks, and Eleanor spent that time expanding her business. Word had spread about her accurate maps, and she was commissioned to survey 2 more ranches and create a detailed map of Santa Fe itself for the town council. She missed Caleb desperately during his absence, but she also took pride in managing on her own. She hired 2 local men to help with the heavy lifting of equipment, learned more Spanish to communicate better with clients, and even taught herself basic bookkeeping to track their growing finances. When Caleb returned in late July, sunburned and exhausted but triumphant, he found Eleanor in their home, surrounded by maps in various stages of completion. She looked up as he walked in, and the joy on her face was like sunlight. "You are back." She flew into his arms, and he caught her, holding tight. "I am back, and the drive was a success. We cleared nearly $400 profit after expenses." He pulled back to look at her. "How did things go here?" "I have completed 3 major surveys, have 2 more commissioned, and the town council wants me to map the entire Santa Fe Trail from here to Independence, Missouri." "Caleb, we are going to be successful, truly successful." He kissed her, long and deep. "I never doubted it." "You are brilliant, and I am the luckiest man alive." That night, over dinner, they discussed the future in concrete terms. The Missouri Trail project would take months, possibly a full year with breaks for weather. They would need to hire additional help, invest in better equipment, maybe even purchase a wagon for longer expeditions. "It is a risk," Eleanor said. "If we invest everything we have into this project and it fails, we could lose it all." "True. But if we do not take the risk, we will never know what we could have built." Caleb took her hand across the table. "What does your cartographer's mind tell you? Do the calculations work out?" Eleanor had already done the calculations multiple times. "If we are careful with expenses, if we work efficiently, if we can sell copies of the completed map to enough people, then yes, it works. We could clear enough profit to expand the business significantly, maybe even hire permanent staff. Then we do it." Caleb's grip tightened on her hand. "We take the risk together." They spent the rest of the summer preparing for the Missouri Trail expedition. Eleanor ordered specialized equipment from back east, high-quality instruments that would withstand months of hard use. Caleb negotiated with wagon builders for a custom survey wagon, fitted with storage for all Eleanor's gear and supplies for extended travel. They hired a young Mexican man named Louis, who had experience as a scout and translator, and a former soldier named Jack, who was handy with repairs and weapons. In September, just as the brutal summer heat began to ease, they set out. The wagon rolled east from Santa Fe, pulled by 4 sturdy horses. Eleanor, Caleb, Louis, and Jack rode alongside, ready for whatever the trail might bring. The work was harder than anything Eleanor had attempted before. The Santa Fe Trail stretched nearly 900 miles, crossing prairies, mountains, rivers, and deserts. She had to map every mile, note every water source, mark every potential hazard. Some days they made good progress, covering 15 or 20 miles while Eleanor gathered data. Other days, difficult terrain or bad weather limited them to just a few miles, but slowly, steadily, the map took shape. Eleanor worked each evening by lantern light in the wagon, transferring the day's observations to paper, cross-checking measurements, refining details. Caleb watched over her, bringing her coffee, reminding her to eat, occasionally pulling her away from work for a few stolen moments of intimacy under the vast prairie sky. They faced challenges. An early snowstorm caught them in the mountains, forcing them to shelter for 3 days. They had tense encounters with groups of Kiowa and Comanche, though Caleb's diplomacy and Louis's translation skills saw them through safely. Jack broke his arm in a fall from his horse and had to ride in the wagon for 2 weeks while it healed. And twice, they ran across outlaw bands who eyed their equipment and horses with clear intent, only retreating when Caleb made it plain he would fight if necessary, through it all. Eleanor never wavered. She continued her work with dogged determination, her maps growing more comprehensive with each passing day. And Caleb, watching her, fell deeper in love with his remarkable wife. She was not the woman he had imagined marrying, back when he thought about such things at all. She was better, more complex and challenging and endlessly fascinating. They reached Independence, Missouri in March of 1879, nearly 6 months after leaving Santa Fe. Eleanor's notebooks were full, her calculations complete. She had mapped the entire Santa Fe Trail with an accuracy no one had achieved before, noting not just the main route but alternate paths, seasonal water sources, dangerous passages that should be avoided. In Independence, they rented rooms at a boarding house and Eleanor spent 2 solid weeks creating the master map. It was her finest work yet, a detailed chart that showed everything a traveler needed to know. Caleb watched her finish it, adding the final details, and felt a swell of pride so intense it almost hurt. "It is done," Eleanor said finally, setting down her pen. She looked exhausted, her face thinner than when they had started, her hands permanently stained with ink. But her eyes shone with triumph. "It is done, and it is perfect." Caleb came to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "You did it. You mapped the Santa Fe Trail better than anyone ever has. We did it." Eleanor covered his hands with hers. "I could not have done this without you, Caleb. Your knowledge, your protection, your faith in me when the work seemed impossible. This is our accomplishment." They had the map printed in Kansas City, ordering 500 copies at significant expense. Then came the work of selling them. Caleb traveled to army posts, trading posts, and settler supply stores, demonstrating the map's accuracy and usefulness. Eleanor wrote to surveying companies, government offices, and newspapers, offering copies for review. The response was overwhelming. Within 2 months, they had sold all 500 copies and had orders for 1,500 more. The Army wanted to purchase the rights to reproduce the map for all their western posts. Several newspapers ran articles about Eleanor, the woman cartographer who had succeeded where government surveyors had failed. Offers poured in for other mapping projects, from railroad companies, from territorial governments, from private land developers. By summer, Eleanor and Caleb were able to return to Santa Fe with enough money to purchase a small house with land, expand their equipment significantly, and hire a permanent staff of 3. Eleanor set up a proper cartography office with multiple drafting tables and storage for her growing collection of maps and survey data, and life settled into a new rhythm, different from those early days but no less fulfilling. Eleanor worked on commissioned surveys, building a reputation that stretched across the West. Caleb managed the business side, negotiating contracts, hiring additional scouts and assistants as needed, ensuring they had the resources for larger projects. They traveled together when possible, Eleanor still most alive when she was in the field, measuring the world. In the spring of 1880, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with mixed emotions. She loved the idea of a child, of building a family with Caleb. But she also feared what it would mean for her work, for the freedom she had fought so hard to claim. Caleb found her sitting at her drafting table, staring at a half-finished map, tears sliding silently down her face. "Eleanor, what is wrong?" she told him, the words tumbling out. "I am pregnant. And I am happy, truly I am, but I am also terrified. What if this means I have to give up everything I have built? What if I become just another wife and mother, trapped in the house while you do all the interesting work? I cannot bear that, Caleb, I cannot." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Listen to me. You are not giving up anything. You are adding to your life, not replacing it. We will figure this out together. Maybe you take a few months off after the baby comes. Maybe you work from home more often, but your work does not end just because we are having a child. I will not let that happen, and neither will you. You promise?" "I promise." "You are Eleanor Morrison, the best cartographer in the New Mexico Territory, possibly in the entire West. You are also going to be a mother, and you will be remarkable at both because that is who you are." Eleanor leaned into him, letting his strength steady her. "I am frightened. So am I. But we will figure it out. We always do." Their son was born in December of 1880, a healthy boy they named James after Eleanor's father. The birth was difficult, hours of labor that left Eleanor exhausted and grateful for the skilled midwife Doña Sanchez had recommended. But when she held James for the first time, felt his tiny weight in her arms, saw his perfect features, she understood a love she had never imagined before. Caleb was a devoted father from the first moment, learning to change diapers and rock the baby to sleep, getting up for nighttime feedings so Eleanor could rest. And true to his word, he made sure Eleanor's work did not disappear. When James was 6 weeks old, Eleanor returned to her drafting table for a few hours each day. When he was 3 months old, she accepted a commission to map a new railroad route, working from home while Caleb and their staff handled the fieldwork. It was not always easy. There were days when Eleanor wanted to scream from the frustration of divided attention, of trying to complete precise calculations while a baby cried in the next room. There were nights when she was so exhausted she could barely remember her own name, let alone complex mathematical formulas. But there were also moments of pure joy. Teaching James to recognize maps as he grew older, watching Caleb play with their son, seeing her career continue to flourish even as her family expanded. By the time James was 2, Eleanor had established a new model. She would complete the office work and planning for surveys, then travel for short field expeditions while Caleb stayed home with James, and finally return to compile the data. It required careful coordination and flexibility, but it worked. In 1883, Eleanor was commissioned by the federal government to create comprehensive maps of the entire New Mexico territory. It was the most prestigious project of her career, an official recognition that her work surpassed anything the government surveyors had produced. The project would take 3 years and would cement her reputation as one of the finest cartographers in America. She and Caleb celebrated that night after James was asleep, dancing slowly in their living room to music only they could hear. "You did it," Caleb murmured against her hair. "You proved everyone wrong, every single person who said a woman could not do this work." "We did it," Eleanor corrected, as always. "I never could have built this without you." "Maybe, but the talent, the vision, the sheer stubborn determination that is all you, Eleanor Morrison. I just had the good sense to recognize it and stick around." Eleanor pulled back to look at him. His face had aged in the 5 years since they met, lines appearing around his eyes, his hair showing the first threads of gray. But he was still the man who had seen her potential in that plaza in Santa Fe, who had taken her seriously when no one else would, who had built a life and a business alongside her. "I love you," she said, "more than I knew it was possible to love another person. I love you too, always." They kissed, and Eleanor thought about how her life had turned out. Not at all what her mother had planned, nothing like the conventional path laid out for young women of her class. She had chosen the wilderness over the drawing room, had married for love instead of security, had insisted on keeping her work even when it would have been easier to give it up. And she had been happy, richly and completely happy, in a way that would never have been possible if she had chosen safety over adventure. The years flowed on. Eleanor completed the territorial survey in 1886, producing maps so detailed and accurate that they remain the standard for decades. She expanded her business to include training other cartographers, establishing a small school that welcomed women as well as men. She and Caleb had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah born in 1884 and another son, William, in 1887. The house was often chaotic, full of children's laughter and scattered toys and the constant background noise of a busy household. But Eleanor's office remained a sanctuary, a place where she could focus on the work she loved. And Caleb continued to be her partner in every sense, managing the business, raising the children alongside her, and occasionally joining her for expeditions when the kids were old enough to stay with Mrs. Chen or the Sanchez's. In 1890, a delegation from the National Geographic Society came to Santa Fe specifically to meet Eleanor. They had heard of her work, had seen examples of her maps, and wanted to feature her in their publication. Eleanor agreed, though she insisted the article mention Caleb's contributions as well. The article appeared that fall with a photograph of Eleanor at her drafting table, surrounded by maps and instruments. The text praised her skill, her dedication, and her groundbreaking work as a woman in a male-dominated field. It brought even more attention, more commissions, more recognition. But what mattered most to Eleanor was not the fame or the accolades. It was the work itself, the satisfaction of solving the puzzle of unknown territory, of creating maps that helped people navigate safely through dangerous country. And it was the life she had built with Caleb, the partnership that had sustained her through challenges and celebrated her triumphs. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Caleb gave her a gift, a leather-bound journal with blank pages, intended for her to record her cartographic observations and personal reflections. "I want you to write down your story," he said. "So our children and grandchildren will know what you accomplished, what you fought for. You changed what is possible for women out here, Eleanor. That deserves to be remembered." Eleanor started writing that night, beginning with the day she arrived in Santa Fe, young and determined and utterly naive about what lay ahead. She wrote about those early surveys, about learning to read the land, about the day Caleb had asked to see her maps. She wrote about falling in love in the wilderness, about building a business from nothing, about the challenges of balancing motherhood with her career. It took her 2 years to complete the journal, working on it in spare moments between projects and family obligations. When she finally filled the last page, she felt a sense of completion, as if she had mapped not just territory but her own life's journey. The children grew. James showed an aptitude for mathematics and engineering, eventually going east to study at university. Sarah was fascinated by art and illustration, often sitting with Eleanor and learning to draw maps with the same precision her mother used. William was more interested in ranching, spending time with Caleb learning about cattle and horses, but he too absorbed the importance of accurate maps for managing land. In 1895, when Eleanor was 40 years old and Caleb 42, they took a trip together, just the two of them, back to the places where their story had begun. They rode out to the Pecos River, to the Line Shack where they had sheltered from the storm, to the Sanchez Ranch where Don and Doña had welcomed them so kindly. Don Sanchez had died the previous year, but Doña greeted them with joy, insisting they stay for dinner. Over the meal, Eleanor and Caleb recounted their journey, everything they had built since those early days. "I knew," Doña said when they finished. "That first night you stayed here, I saw how you looked at each other, and I thought these two, they will do something special together." I am glad I was right. They camped that night near the Pecos, under the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss. Eleanor lay in Caleb's arms, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, feeling perfectly content. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Choosing this life with me instead of something more conventional?" "Never." Caleb's answer was immediate, certain. "Eleanor, you gave me a life I never imagined was possible, a partnership built on mutual respect, children I adore, work that matters. I have watched you change the world, one map at a time. How could I ever regret that? I worried in the beginning that I was being selfish, insisting on keeping my work, on not becoming a traditional wife. And I was terrified you would wake up one day and realize you had married a cowboy with nothing to offer but a good horse and decent aim." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "But we chose each other, Eleanor. We chose to build something new, a marriage where both partners were equals. It was not always easy, but it was always right." Eleanor turned in his arms to kiss him properly. "I love you, Caleb Morrison. Thank you for keeping my maps. Thank you for keeping me." "Always," he promised. "Always." The next morning, they rode back towards Santa Fe, taking their time, stopping frequently so Eleanor could take notes on how the landscape had changed over the years. The territory was transforming rapidly, railroads spreading like veins across the land, towns growing, wilderness shrinking. Soon, Eleanor knew, there would be little unmapped territory left, at least not in the Southwest. But that was all right. She had helped map this land, had created records that would endure long after she was gone, and she had other projects in mind, new frontiers to explore. She was considering a book, a comprehensive guide to cartographic techniques specifically for the Western Territories. Several universities had written asking her to lecture on practical surveying methods. There was still work to be done, still contributions to make. They returned home to find the house in cheerful chaos. Sarah had attempted to bake a cake for their return and had somehow managed to cover the kitchen in flour. William had tracked mud through the entire first floor. James, home from university for the summer, was trying to manage his siblings and clearly failing. Eleanor looked at the mess, at her children's guilty faces, at Caleb's barely suppressed laughter, and felt her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. This was her life, chaotic and imperfect and absolutely perfect all at once. The years continued their steady march. Eleanor remained active in her cartography business well into her 50s, though she gradually shifted more toward training and consultation than field work. She published her cartography textbook in 1900, and it became a standard reference used by surveyors and mapmakers across the country. Caleb stayed fit and active, still riding out to check on various ranching operations, still serving as Eleanor's partner in every sense. They grew old together, their love deepening and mellowing like fine whiskey. James married in 1902, bringing home a smart, practical woman named Anne who reminded Eleanor very much of herself at that age. They settled in Denver, where James worked as a civil engineer. Sarah married a year later to an artist she had met through her illustration work, and they moved to Taos to establish a studio. William, true to his nature, married a rancher's daughter and took over operation of the small ranch Eleanor and Caleb had purchased years earlier. And in 1905, Eleanor and Caleb became grandparents for the first time when James and Anne welcomed a daughter. Eleanor held her granddaughter, looked at the baby's perfect tiny features and thought about the legacy she was leaving. Not just maps, though those would endure, but also a model of what was possible, of a woman who had refused to accept limitations, who had insisted on using her talents fully, who had built a life on her own terms. That evening, sitting on the porch of their home with Caleb beside her, watching the sun set over the mountains, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that first day in the Santa Fe Plaza, 27 years ago, when a young cartographer had met a cowboy who took her seriously. Everything had flowed from that moment, from that choice to trust each other, to build something together. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his hand finding hers. "How lucky I am, how grateful." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "I came west with nothing but ambition and surveying equipment, and I found everything I never knew I needed. Meaningful work, true partnership, love, family, all of it because you kept my maps." Caleb smiled. "Best maps I ever owned. They led me exactly where I needed to go. And where was that? Home." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "You were always home, Eleanor, from the very first day." They sat together in the fading light, two people who had chosen each other and built a remarkable life from that choice. The maps Eleanor had created lined the walls of their house, a testament to her skill and dedication. But the real map, she thought, was the one she and Caleb had drawn together over the years, charting a course through life that no surveyor could have predicted, navigating by love and respect and unwavering partnership. In the winter of 1910, Eleanor was approached by the New Mexico Historical Society to create one final map, a comprehensive survey of how the territory had changed over the past 30 years. She was 65 years old, and the work would be challenging. But how could she refuse? It was a chance to document the transformation she had witnessed, to create a historical record of a time and place that was already passing into memory. She worked on the project for 2 years, comparing her old surveys with new observations, documenting the growth of towns, the spread of railroads, the changes in settlement patterns. Caleb helped when he could, though his own health was beginning to fail. His knees ached in cold weather, old injuries from years in the saddle catching up with him. But his mind remained sharp, and he offered insights and memories that enriched Eleanor's work. The map was completed in 1912 and was immediately recognized as a masterwork, a detailed historical document that captured 3 decades of Western expansion. The territorial government purchased the original to display in the new state capitol building in Santa Fe. New Mexico had achieved statehood in 1912, and Eleanor's maps had played a small but significant role in that process, providing accurate surveys of resources and population that supported the statehood petition. At the dedication ceremony, with her children and grandchildren present, Eleanor was asked to speak about her work. She stood at the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd, and felt the weight of years and accomplishment settle on her shoulders. "I came to this territory as a young woman with a dream and no clear path to achieve it," she began. "I was told repeatedly that cartography was not women's work, that I should give up my ambitions and settle for something more appropriate. But I believed that accurate maps mattered, that the work was worth doing, and I refused to accept that my gender disqualified me from contributing." She paused, finding Caleb in the audience. He smiled at her, his pride evident even from a distance. "I did not do this work alone," Eleanor continued. "My husband, Caleb Morrison, was my partner in every sense. He respected my skills, supported my ambitions, and helped build a business where my talents could flourish. Together, we mapped thousands of miles of territory, trained dozens of new cartographers, and created resources that have helped countless people navigate this beautiful, challenging land safely." Her eyes moved to her children and grandchildren. "I hope that my work and my example will show future generations that women belong wherever their talents and interests take them. Whether that is cartography or medicine or business or politics, we deserve the chance to contribute fully, to use our minds and skills without arbitrary limitations." The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached Eleanor to thank her, to share stories of how her maps had helped them, to express admiration for her courage and perseverance. A young woman, perhaps 20 years old, shook Eleanor's hand with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the young woman said. "I am studying to be a surveyor and everyone keeps telling me I should quit, but seeing what you have accomplished, knowing it is possible, it gives me hope." Eleanor squeezed the young woman's hand. "Do not quit, the work needs you. And do not let anyone convince you that being a woman makes you less capable. Your mind and your skills are just as valuable as any man's." That night, back home, Eleanor and Caleb sat together by the fireplace. She was exhausted from the day's events, but also deeply satisfied. "You were magnificent today," Caleb said. "I was so proud, Eleanor, of everything you have accomplished, everything you have become." "We accomplished," she corrected gently. "Always we, Caleb. I could never have done any of this without you. Maybe, but I was just the guide. You were the one with the vision, the skill, the determination. I just made sure you survived long enough to share your gifts with the world." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth and solidity of him. They were both old now, their bodies wearing the years. But the love between them remained strong, a constant in a changing world. "Do you remember that storm?" she asked. "When we sheltered in the line shack and you kissed me for the first time?" "I remember everything. Every moment with you is carved into my heart." Caleb's arm tightened around her. "That storm changed my life, or maybe it just revealed what was already there, waiting to happen. I think about that sometimes. How different everything would have been if I had never met you, if you had not taken me seriously, if we had not chosen each other. Do not think about it." That version of the world does not exist. This one does, and it is exactly right. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, Santa Fe was settling into night, the town they had watched grow and change over 3 decades. Inside, Eleanor and Caleb held each other, grateful for the life they had built, for the love that had sustained them through everything. The years that followed were gentler, quieter. Eleanor still worked, but at a slower pace, focusing on writing and consultation rather than field surveys. Caleb's health continued to decline gradually, but he remained active and engaged, still the steady presence at Eleanor's side. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and even a great-grandchild. James and Anne had 3 children now, Sarah and her husband had 2, and William's family had expanded to 4 children. The house overflowed with family, with laughter and stories, and the chaos of multiple generations gathered together. That evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, Eleanor and Caleb stood on the porch, looking out at the familiar landscape silvered by moonlight. 40 years, Eleanor said softly. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like no time at all. Best 40 years of my life. Caleb's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with the ease of long practice. No regrets, Eleanor, not a single one. Me neither. She turned to look at him, this man who had been her partner, her love, her constant companion through everything. His face was deeply lined now, his hair completely white, his body bent slightly by age and hard use. But his eyes still held that same warmth, that same intelligence, that same love that had captured her heart 40 years ago. Thank you, she said, for everything. For believing in me, for building this life with me, for being exactly who you are. Thank you for mapping the territory better than any surveyor could, Caleb replied with a smile. And for letting me keep your maps and use them. They led me to everything worth finding. They kissed, gentle and sweet, a kiss that held 40 years of love and partnership and unbreakable commitment. And standing there under the New Mexico stars, Eleanor felt complete. Her life had been exactly what she wanted it to be, built through her own choices and hard work, and the love of a good man who had seen her for who she truly was. Caleb Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1922, at the age of 68. Eleanor held his hand as he took his last breath, her heart breaking even as she whispered her love one final time. The grief was enormous, a weight that pressed on her chest and made every breath difficult. He had been her partner for 43 years, and his absence left a hole in her life that nothing could fill. But Eleanor Morrison was strong, forged by years of challenging work and difficult choices. She mourned deeply, allowing herself the full measure of grief, but she did not break. She continued to live, to work, to engage with her family and her community. She finished one last project, a comprehensive atlas of New Mexico that incorporated all her life's work, decades of surveying and mapping brought together in one definitive volume. The atlas was published in 1924, dedicated to Caleb's memory. It was immediately recognized as a landmark achievement, a cartographic masterwork that would serve as the standard reference for generations. Eleanor donated copies to every library, school, and government office in the state, ensuring that her work would remain accessible to anyone who needed it. In the summer of 1925, at the age of 70, Eleanor gave a final public lecture at the University of New Mexico. She had been invited to speak about her career, about the evolution of cartography in the West, about the changes she had witnessed over nearly 50 years. The auditorium was packed, filled with students, faculty, fellow cartographers, and members of the public who wanted to hear from the legendary Eleanor Morrison. She stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and felt a deep sense of peace. When I arrived in Santa Fe in 1878, I was a young woman with more ambition than sense, she began, and the audience chuckled. I had excellent training in cartography, but no experience, no connections, and no realistic plan for how to build a career in a field that did not welcome women. I should have failed. By all conventional wisdom, I should have gone home in defeat and settled for a traditional life. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But I did not fail because I found a partner who believed in me. Caleb Morrison saw my potential before I had proven anything, and he gave me the chance to demonstrate my skills. Together, we built a business that not only succeeded but flourished, creating maps that helped thousands of people navigate this territory safely. Eleanor's voice grew stronger. I am often asked what advice I would give to young women who want to pursue unconventional careers. And my answer is this: believe in your own abilities, refuse to accept arbitrary limitations, and find partners who respect your talents. Success requires hard work, skill, and persistence. But it also requires refusing to internalize other people's doubts about what you can achieve. She looked around the auditorium, making eye contact with as many people as she could. The West is still young, still being shaped and defined. There is room here for everyone's contributions, regardless of gender or background. Do not let anyone tell you that your dreams are impossible. I spent 5 decades proving that women can excel in cartography, and I hope my work opens doors for others in every field. The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. Afterward, dozens of students approached Eleanor, thanking her, asking questions, sharing their own dreams and ambitions. A young woman in her early 20s shook Eleanor's hand with obvious emotion. Mrs. Morrison, I am studying cartography because of you. Your atlas inspired me to pursue this field, even though my family thinks I am crazy. Thank you for showing me it is possible. Eleanor squeezed the young woman's hand. What is your name? Margaret Chen. My grandmother, Mrs. Chen. She ran the boarding house where you stayed when you first came to Santa Fe. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Mrs. Chen was very kind to me when I needed kindness. I am glad her granddaughter is continuing the tradition of strong women forging their own paths. She talks about you often, Margaret said. She says you were the bravest woman she ever met. Tell her I said she was pretty brave herself, coming to a strange country and building a life after losing her husband. We all do what we must, Margaret. We all find strength we did not know we had. Eleanor returned home that evening feeling tired but satisfied. She had said what needed to be said, had passed on the lessons learned over a lifetime of challenging work. Now she could rest. She spent her final years surrounded by family, watching her grandchildren grow, welcoming new great-grandchildren. She kept her mind active by reading, by corresponding with other cartographers and scholars, by continuing to refine and update her maps as new information became available. And every day she thought of Caleb, missing him with an ache that never fully faded but became bearable over time. Eleanor Morrison passed away in her sleep on a cold January night in 1928, at the age of 73. She was buried beside Caleb in the Santa Fe Cemetery under a simple stone that read, Eleanor Hartwell Morrison, 1855 to 1928, cartographer, pioneer, partner. Her obituary ran in newspapers across the country, celebrating her contributions to cartography and her role as a trailblazer for women in science. The New Mexico Historical Society established the Eleanor Morrison Award for Excellence in Cartography, given annually to outstanding surveyors and mapmakers. The University of New Mexico created an endowed scholarship in her name, specifically for women studying cartography, surveying, or related fields. But perhaps Eleanor's greatest legacy was not the awards or the recognition, or even the remarkable maps she had created. It was the example she had set, the proof she had provided that women could excel in any field they chose, that marriage and career could coexist, that love and partnership could sustain even the most ambitious dreams. Her children and grandchildren kept her memory alive, sharing stories of the grandmother who had mapped the West, who had refused to accept limitations, who had built a life of meaning and purpose and love. They displayed her maps in their homes, used her atlas as they traveled, and told their own children about the remarkable woman who had changed what was possible. And somewhere, in some cosmic sense that transcended death, Eleanor and Caleb were together again. He was keeping her maps, she was charting new territory, and they were embarking on whatever adventure came next, partners as they had always been, united by a love that even death could not diminish. Their story became legend in New Mexico, told and retold over the years. The woman cartographer and the cowboy who had believed in her, who had built a business and a life together in the wild territory of the American West. It was a love story and an adventure story and an inspiration story all at once, proof that courage and talent and partnership could overcome any obstacle. Years after Eleanor's death, when Margaret Chen had become a renowned cartographer in her own right, she gave a lecture about her famous predecessor. She stood before a new generation of students and told them about Eleanor Morrison, about her precision and dedication and revolutionary work. Mrs. Morrison once told me that mapping is like solving a mystery, Margaret said. You study the land, you take careful measurements, you piece together information until suddenly the picture becomes clear. But I think she was mapping more than just territory. She was mapping a new path for women, showing us it was possible to have careers and families, to be respected for our minds and our skills. Margaret paused, looking at the young faces before her. The maps Eleanor Morrison created are still in use today, nearly 50 years after she drew them. That is how good she was, how precise and thorough. But more than that, she created a map for how women can live full, ambitious lives without apology. She showed us that we do not have to choose between love and work, between family and career. We can have both if we are brave enough to insist on it and lucky enough to find partners who support us. She held up a copy of Eleanor's atlas, its pages worn from decades of use. This is my most treasured possession. Not because of its monetary value, though it is quite valuable, but because it represents everything Mrs. Morrison stood for. Excellence, persistence, courage, and the absolute refusal to let other people's limitations define her possibilities. Margaret smiled. She was mapping the territory better than surveyors could, and her cowboy kept her maps and used them. Together, they navigated life in a way that created something remarkable. May we all be so lucky and so brave. The students applauded, inspired by the story of a woman who had lived nearly a century before, but whose impact continued to ripple forward through time. Eleanor Morrison's maps remained accurate, her methods remained sound, and her example remained relevant to every person who dared to dream beyond society's expectations. And in Santa Fe, in the house Eleanor and Caleb had shared for so many years, now occupied by William's grandson and his young family, the walls still displayed some of Eleanor's original maps. The children growing up there learned to read those maps, learned the story of their remarkable great-great-grandmother who had charted the West with precision and love. On clear nights, when the stars emerged over New Mexico in their ancient patterns, those children would go outside and locate the constellations Eleanor had used for navigation. They would trace the paths she had ridden, imagine the challenges she had overcome, and understand that they carried her legacy forward simply by believing in their own potential. Eleanor Morrison had mapped the territory better than any surveyor could, creating charts that guided thousands of people safely through dangerous country. But she had also mapped something more profound, a way of living that honored both ambition and love, that refused to accept false limitations, that insisted on partnership and equality and mutual respect. Her cowboy had kept her maps and used them, not just for cattle drives and wilderness navigation, but as guides for how to love and support an extraordinary woman without diminishing her gifts. Together, they had created a marriage that defied convention and proved that partnership built on respect could sustain any challenge. Their love story, played out against the dramatic landscape of the American West, became more than just personal history. It became inspiration, proof that courage and skill and devotion could create something lasting and beautiful. The maps remained, precise and reliable, testaments to Eleanor's genius. But the greater testament was the life she and Caleb had built together, a legacy of love and partnership that endured long after both had passed from the world. In the end, Eleanor Morrison succeeded not just in mapping the physical territory of the West, but in mapping a new territory of possibility for women, showing future generations that they could claim any field, pursue any dream, build any life they had the courage to imagine. And she had done it all while finding deep, abiding love with a man who saw her genius and chose to walk beside her rather than ahead or behind. That was her greatest map of all, the chart she drew with her life, showing that a woman could be brilliant and successful and deeply loved, that she could change the world while building a family, that she could refuse to choose between competing goods and instead claim everything her heart desired. Eleanor Hartwell Morrison, cartographer and pioneer, mapped the West with precision and passion. But the territory she mapped most profoundly was the human heart, proving that love and ambition, partnership and independence could coexist in beautiful, revolutionary harmony. Her maps guided travelers for generations, but her example guided something more important, the hopes and dreams of everyone who came after, daring to imagine lives as full and rich and remarkable as the one she had lived. And that legacy, like the stars she navigated by, would endure forever, constant and true, lighting the way for those brave enough to follow where she had blazed the trail.